The morning my mother threw my grandfather's passbook into the trash, she thought she was burying a piece of paper. She had no idea she was triggering a federal fraud investigation, freezing nearly $3 million, and sending both herself and my brother to prison. My name is Alara Whitfield. I'm a paralegal in Columbus, Ohio. I've handled estate disputes for years, but nothing prepared me for the day I realized my own family had been quietly draining my grandfather's life savings while telling the world he was confused. What she didn't know was that the bank had already flagged the account. My grandfather had documented everything, and I was about to make the call that would change all of our lives. Chapter 1. The Will Inside the Chessbook. I have always believed that if you sit quietly enough in a room full of grief, you can hear what people are really thinking. At my grandfather Harold Whitfield's funeral, what I heard was impatience. The service was held in a small brick church in Lancaster, Ohio, a town that still smells faintly of cut hay and diesel trucks. It was late November of 2023. The kind of gray Midwestern afternoon where the sky looks unfinished. My grandfather was 88 when he died. The pastor spoke about integrity and long days of honest work. I watched my mother check her watch. Marianne Whitfield stood in the front pew like she was hosting an event, not mourning her father-in-law. She had chosen the flowers, the hymns, the guest list. She had also called a real estate agent the day before the funeral to get a feel for the market. I knew that because I overheard her in the kitchen, her voice low but brisk. "We should list it before spring," she had said. "The farm won't appreciate sitting empty." The farm. She never called it Dad's place. It was an asset to her, a line item. My brother Caleb sat on the other side of her, tall, polished, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent in Columbus. He worked as a registered representative, had his Series 7, and liked to remind people he understood markets better than emotions. He kept his hands folded, his face composed, like he was attending a shareholder meeting. I stood alone in the pew behind them, 34 years old, paralegal at a civil litigation firm in Columbus that handled estate planning and probate disputes more often than divorces. I had helped clients untangle messy inheritances, watched siblings turn into strangers over bank accounts and houses. I never thought I would be narrating my own. 2 weeks before he died, I had sat at my grandfather's kitchen table while he drank weak coffee and insisted on real sugar instead of the packets my mother bought. His hands were thinner than I remembered, but his mind was sharp. "Alara," he said, looking at me over the rim of his mug, "in my study there is a book on chess. Inside it, something important. Only you." He said "only you" the way a judge might say guilty, calm, certain, final. I asked him what he meant. He just smiled and tapped the side of his head. "You ask questions," he said. "Don't stop." At the time, I thought it was sentiment, a symbolic bequest, a book we used to read together when I was 10, and he taught me that patience was not weakness. After the funeral, while casseroles cooled untouched in the church basement, I drove out to the farm alone. It sat just outside Lancaster on a stretch of road lined with bare trees and mailboxes that leaned like tired men. The house was quiet in a way that felt temporary, as if it expected him to walk back in. My mother and Caleb were meeting the realtor. I had about an hour. His study smelled like paper and old wood polish. The desk was exactly as he had left it, neat, squared edges on every stack of documents. On the bookshelf, third shelf from the top, sat Mastering the Endgame, the same hardcover I had traced with my finger as a child. When I pulled it down, it felt heavier than I remembered. I sat in his leather chair and opened it. The pages had been hollowed out, cleanly cut. Inside was a dark brown passbook, the kind banks used decades ago. The leather was worn at the corners. I flipped it open and saw printed entries and a routing number that did not look decades old. I did not read carefully. I did not search for hidden notes. I saw numbers and assumed they were relics, maybe an old account he never closed. I closed the book and walked back into the kitchen. I wanted to keep it, to say this was mine, a memory, not a monetary claim. "Mom," I said, "I found Grandpa's chess book. The binding is torn." I tilted it to show her the cracked spine. The passbook slipped out before I could catch it. Marianne's eyes landed on it instantly. She moved faster than I had seen her move all day. She picked it up, flipped it open, and for a fraction of a second, something flashed across her face. Not confusion, not sadness, recognition. "That's nothing," she said quickly. "That account was closed years ago. He kept everything, old statements, old junk." She walked to the trash can by the sink and dropped it. Just like that. Caleb did not speak. He just watched her. Then he looked at me with an expression that said, "Let it go." I did not argue. I did not retrieve it. I said okay and placed the book back on the counter. But I cataloged everything. The way her hand tightened on the cover, the way she avoided looking at me after, the way Caleb shifted his weight as if bracing for something. That night in my apartment in Columbus, I lay awake replaying the scene. Only you. If it was nothing, why did she move like that? Why not laugh it off? Why not hand it back? At 4:30 in the morning, I gave up on sleep. I drove back to Lancaster in the dark, the highway nearly empty except for semis and the occasional deer darting near the shoulder. I had a spare key. My mother was staying at her house in town. The farm was empty. The trash bag was still in the kitchen can. I carried it outside to the porch light and opened it. The passbook was wedged between paper towels and a takeout container. I wiped it off with the sleeve of my coat. This time, I went back into the study and locked the door behind me. I sat at the desk and examined it slowly. The entries were not decades old. The last update was from 2022. The account number printed on the first page did not match the formatting of older mid-state federal bank accounts I had seen in probate files at work. When I pressed along the inner spine of the book, I felt resistance. I peeled back a thin strip of paper glued along the binding. Beneath it was a small folded note. My hands shook, not dramatically, but enough that I had to steady them against the desk. Inside the note was another account number, handwritten, and a sentence in my grandfather's careful script. "They do not know about this one. Do not trust anyone." No exclamation points, no panic, just instruction. I stared at the words for a long time. They did not feel like paranoia. They felt like strategy. I took out my phone and photographed every page of the passbook, the hidden note, and the cut edges of the book. I uploaded the images to my cloud storage and emailed copies to myself from a secure account I used for work documents. If there was one thing estate litigation had taught me, it was this: documentation is oxygen. I slid the note back into the spine and placed the passbook in my bag. I locked the study and left the house exactly as I had found it. In my car, I searched Mid-State Federal Bank. The closest branch to Lancaster had merged in 2019. Accounts opened before 2017 were handled through the main office in Cleveland. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, the fields still dark around me. My mother believed she had thrown away a piece of paper. My grandfather believed I would find it. I drove back toward Columbus as the sun rose over the frozen fields, already knowing that before I spoke to my mother again, I would be sitting across from someone at Mid-State Federal in Cleveland, asking questions my family did not want answered. Chapter 2. The account no one knew about. By 9 the next morning, I was back on the highway, heading north toward Cleveland, with a thermos of gas station coffee and the passbook sealed inside my bag like contraband. The drive from Columbus to Cleveland is just under 3 hours if traffic cooperates. It gave me time to think in straight lines. That is something I am good at. At work, I build timelines out of messy facts. I separate emotion from evidence. I tell clients what can be proven and what cannot. This time, I was both the paralegal and the client. About 40 minutes into the drive, I called Victor Langley. He answered on the fourth ring. "Alara," he said, his voice still strong despite his 74 years. "I was going to call you." I told him I had found something in Grandpa's study and that I needed to see him soon. I did not explain over the phone. I said only that it involved an account and that it might connect to the concerns Grandpa had raised a few years ago. There was a pause on the line. "All right," he said. "I will be in my office tomorrow afternoon. Bring whatever you found. And Ilara, do not discuss it with anyone else yet." I had not planned to. Mid-State Federal Bank's main office in Cleveland sits in a glass building downtown, polished and impersonal. I parked in a garage across the street and sat in my car for a moment before going in. I pulled out the passbook and the folded note, looking at my grandfather's handwriting one more time. They do not know about this one. Inside, the lobby was quiet. A few customers waited in line. I approached the reception desk and explained that I needed assistance with a legacy account. I handed over the handwritten account number from the note, not the one printed in the passbook. The young woman at the desk typed it in, her expression neutral. Then she frowned slightly and looked at her screen longer than expected. "One moment," she said. "I am going to get our branch manager." That shift in tone was subtle but unmistakable. A man in his early 50s came out from behind a frosted glass door. He introduced himself as Mr. Callahan, the branch manager. He shook my hand and asked me to follow him into a private office. He closed the door before sitting down. "You said you are the granddaughter of Harold Whitfield?" he asked. "Yes." He typed again, slower this time. The air felt heavier. "This account was opened in 2016, he said. "It is a high-yield savings account. There have been no withdrawals since it was funded." He turned the monitor slightly so I could see the balance. $2,384,750. For a second, the number did not register as money. It looked abstract, like a phone number or a code. Then it settled in my chest. "That is not possible," I heard myself say. Mr. Callahan nodded once. "The account was initially funded by a transfer from another Whitfield account that was closed in 2016. Since then, it has accrued interest. There have been no outgoing transactions." "My father died in 2014, I said. "My grandfather moved in with my mother shortly after that." Mr. Callahan glanced at another screen. "There is something else you should know," he said. "In 2018, there was an attempt to access this account under a power of attorney." My pulse slowed instead of racing. Slower is better when you need to listen. The documentation submitted at that time did not fully match the signature card on file. Our compliance department flagged the transaction. A suspicious activity report was filed as required under federal regulations. No funds were released. "Who submitted the power of attorney?" I asked. He looked at the screen, then at me. "Marianne Whitfield." The name felt heavier than the number had. I nodded, keeping my face steady. "That makes sense," I said, "because she's been managing my grandfather's affairs since my father passed." Mr. Callahan did not respond to that. He continued, "The account has been under internal review since 2018. In 2020, your grandfather contacted our fraud department directly. He alleged that he had been pressured into signing financial documents. At that time, we did not have sufficient evidence to escalate the matter beyond documentation and internal flagging." He turned the monitor back toward himself. "As of now, the account remains active but restricted. No changes to ownership can be made without a court order or verified executor documentation." Executor documentation. My grandfather's estate was still in early probate stages. My mother had positioned herself as the primary contact. "I would like copies of the 2018 submission and the 2020 complaint. I understand there may be legal steps required. I work in estate litigation. I know the process." Mr. Callahan studied me for a moment, perhaps recalibrating how to speak to me. "We'll need a formal written request and likely verification of your status as a potential beneficiary or representative," he said. "Given the prior flag and SAR filing, our legal department may also coordinate with federal authorities if a formal complaint is initiated." Federal authorities. The word did not scare me. It clarified the stakes. I thanked him for his time and asked that the account remain restricted. He assured me it already was. When I stepped out of the building, the cold air felt sharper than before. I walked 2 blocks before my phone rang. Marianne. I let it ring twice before answering. "Where are you?" she asked without greeting. "In Cleveland." "Why?" she demanded. I paused. "The bank called this morning to verify information about Grandpa's accounts," she said. "They said someone had inquired." "That would be me," I replied. There was a silence, then a shift in her tone from irritation to something thinner. "Why would you do that without speaking to me first, Alara? I have handled all his finances for years." "Because he told me to look in his study," I said, "and because I work in this field. It's standard to review accounts after a death." "You're overreacting," she said quickly. "That account was closed a long time ago. He kept old paperwork." I watched a bus pass in front of me, its windows reflecting the gray sky. "That is not what the bank told me," I said. Another pause, then her voice sharpened. "What exactly did they tell you?" "That there was an attempt to access an account in 2018 under a power of attorney, that it was flagged." The silence stretched long enough that I could hear traffic through her end of the line. "You have no idea what you're talking about," she said finally. "Your grandfather was confused those last few years. He did not understand his own paperwork." "That is not how I remember him," I said. She exhaled sharply. "Don't start this, Alara. We are family." Family? I ended the call without saying goodbye. Standing on that Cleveland sidewalk, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not yet. It was alignment, pieces moving into place. In 2018, she had tried to access the account. In 2020, Grandpa had complained. In 2023, he had told me where to look. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a sequence. I drove back to Columbus in near silence, my phone face down on the passenger seat. By the time I reached the outskirts of the city, I knew 2 things. First, I would need Victor Langley to review everything before I made a formal complaint. Second, whatever my mother and Kayla believed was buried in that house was no longer under their control. That evening, alone in my apartment, I laid the passbook and the note on my kitchen table and stared at my grandfather's handwriting. They do not know about this one. He had trusted me to find it. Now I had to decide how far I was willing to go once I understood exactly what they did not know. Chapter 3. The Long Game. The following afternoon, I sat across from Victor Langley in his office in Columbus, the passbook resting on his desk like something fragile and radioactive at the same time. Victor did not rush me. He never did. He folded his hands and waited. I told him everything. The funeral in Lancaster, my mother already talking to a realtor, the chess book, the passbook falling out, the way Marianne moved too fast, like she had been waiting for that exact object to appear, the trash can, the 5 a.m. drive back to the farm, Cleveland, the balance. $2,384,750. Victor did not react to the number the way most people would. He nodded once, as if it confirmed something he had suspected for a long time. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out a thick file folder. "Harold started bringing me documents in 2019, he said, quietly, one envelope at a time. He slid the folder toward me. Inside were copies of bank statements from 2015 through 2021, pages of transaction logs, transfers in round numbers that did not look random. 15,000 here, 25,000 there, 40,000 moved through intermediary accounts, each amount small enough not to cause immediate alarm, each one part of a pattern. Between 2015 and 2021, Victor said, approximately $1,870,000 left Harold's primary accounts. The number did not shock me the way the Cleveland balance had. This number made sense in a terrible way. It explained why my grandfather had once joked that he must be bad at math because his savings seemed to shrink even though he rarely left the house. He suspected Marianne was controlling more than she admitted, Victor continued. He told me she handled all of his paperwork after Thomas died in 2014. He felt isolated. He believed he was being pressured to sign documents without full explanation. I remembered my mother sitting at the kitchen table with stacks of envelopes, telling Grandpa she would take care of it, that he did not need to worry about details anymore. In 2020, Victor said, Harold contacted the bank's fraud department. He also reached out to Adult Protective Services. The investigation did not move forward because there was not enough documentation. He did not have proof yet. Victor reached for another document. In 2021, he updated his estate plan. He named you sole beneficiary of what remained. He attached a notarized affidavit stating he was of sound mind. 3 physicians documented his mental capacity between 2021 and 2022. I stared at the affidavit. My grandfather's signature was steady, unmistakable. He anticipated she would claim confusion, Victor said. He wanted that argument neutralized in advance. Why me? I asked, even though I knew the answer. Because you were not financially dependent on her, Victor replied. Because you understand how documentation works. And because he believed you would not accept a quiet settlement. The phrase quiet settlement lingered in the air. 2 days later, my phone rang while I was in my car outside my office in Columbus. This is Detective Alicia Moreno with Financial Crimes Division, the voice said. I am following up on information forwarded by Mid-State Federal Bank regarding a flagged account connected to Harold Whitfield. My pulse steadied instead of racing. We have been reviewing related transactions for several months, she continued. A portion of the funds moved through an entity called Cedar Ridge Holdings, LLC, established in Ohio in 2016. It is registered under Caleb Whitfield with a middle initial. I closed my eyes briefly. Approximately $720,000 flowed through that entity and into brokerage accounts, she said. We are coordinating with forensic analysts regarding the 2018 power of attorney submission. The signature discrepancy is significant. So this was not just suspicion, it was structure. We will need a formal statement from you, Detective Moreno said, and I want to be clear. When individuals realize exposure is imminent, they often attempt to influence witnesses. Influence witnesses? I thought of my mother's voice on the phone. Family. That evening, Caleb texted me. We need to talk, in person. I did not respond immediately. I called Victor first. He listened quietly, then said, if you meet him, protect yourself. Do not argue, do not accuse. Let him talk. I followed his advice. I made sure any method I used to preserve the conversation was lawful. I did not intend to trap anyone. I intended to document. We met at a coffee shop downtown. Caleb arrived early. He stood when I approached, smiling in a way that would have reassured anyone who didn't know him well. You look exhausted, he said. So do you, I replied. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Mom is upset. She thinks you are digging into things that do not concern you. It concerns me if Grandpa left something for me to find, I said. He exhaled slowly. Ilara, after Dad died, everything fell apart. Mom carried it. Bills, taxes, Grandpa's medical appointments. She made decisions to keep things stable. Did those decisions involve withdrawing $1,870,000? I asked evenly. His eyes flickered. Money moved. That does not automatically mean wrongdoing. There was a power of attorney attempt in 2018. It was flagged. He looked down at his cup. Grandpa was stubborn. He did not always understand the complexity of his accounts. That line again, confusion. Cedar Ridge Holdings, I said. Your company. He hesitated half a second too long. It was just a vehicle, he replied. I set it up to manage investments. Mom asked me to help. Approximately $720,000 went through it. He did not deny it. Look, he finally said, I didn't know everything. I trusted her. And you should too. We can fix this without turning it into a criminal circus. How? I asked. He held my gaze. I can transfer you $500,000, quietly. You step back, no statements, no cooperation. Mom keeps her dignity. We all move on. The offer was clean, simple, in the way shortcuts always are. You were asking me to ignore a federal investigation, I said. I am asking you to protect your family, he countered. Do you really want to see Mom in handcuffs? For a moment, I imagined it. the neighbors watching, the news vans, the humiliation. Then I imagined my grandfather in his study, cutting pages out of a chess book to hide a passbook. "If I was wrong," I said quietly, "you would not need to offer me anything." His expression hardened. "You think you are better than us because you file paperwork all day?" he said. "No," I replied. "I think Grandpa deserved transparency." He stood up abruptly. "You are making a mistake," he said. "Maybe," I answered, "but it's mine to make." He left without finishing his drink. The next morning, Daniel Brooks called me into his office at the firm. "I'm not interested in the details," he said carefully, "but if this matter becomes public and criminal charges are filed, the firm cannot appear entangled. You will need to take a leave of absence, unpaid." I felt the impact of that more than I expected. "For how long?" I asked. "Until the dust settles," he replied. I agreed. I packed a small box from my desk that afternoon, a framed photo of my grandfather teaching me chess when I was 8, a legal pad with half-finished notes. That evening, Detective Moreno called again. "We have probable cause," she said. "The 2018 Suspicious Activity Report, the 2021 affidavit, the financial trail through Cedar Ridge Holdings, and the forensic handwriting analysis together established a pattern. A judge has signed search and arrest warrants." My breath caught. "When?" I asked. "Soon," she replied. "Do not alert them. Document any contact. Let us handle the execution." After the call, I drove out to the farm in Lancaster and let myself into my grandfather's study. The room felt unchanged, the desk neat, the air still. I opened the chess book and ran my fingers along the hollowed pages. He knew he might not live to see the outcome. He planned anyway. I set up the chessboard the way he used to, white pieces toward the window, black pieces toward the door. He had not confronted my mother directly. He had built a record instead. He had played the long game. Now the warrants were signed, the pattern documented, the moves irreversible. Sitting in his chair, I realized I was no longer deciding whether to act. I was preparing to witness the consequences of actions that had been unfolding for nearly a decade. Chapter 4. Consequences. The consequences arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning in September 2024. Detective Alicia Moreno called me at 6:18 a.m. "It's happening today," she said. "Lancaster and Columbus, simultaneous." I was already awake. I had been sleeping lightly for weeks, as if my body knew something was coming. "Do I need to be there?" I asked. "No," she replied. "You do not need to witness this." But I did. I drove to Lancaster and parked a block away from my mother's house. The sky was pale and thin, the kind of early fall morning where the air feels deceptively gentle. 2 unmarked vehicles were already at the curb. Uniformed officers stood near the front door. I stayed inside my car. Marianne opened the door before they knocked a second time. She was wearing a cardigan I had seen her wear at church, her hair still pinned back from sleep. Even from that distance, I could see the confusion in her posture. One of the officers stepped forward. "Marianne Whitfield?" She nodded. "You are under arrest for financial exploitation of an elderly person, forgery, and federal wire fraud." The words sounded unreal, like dialogue from a show I would normally turn off halfway through. "I think there's been a mistake," I heard her say. There was no shouting, no dramatic collapse, just procedure. They placed her hands behind her back and secured the cuffs. She turned once, scanning the street, and for a split second, her eyes landed on my car. I do not know if she saw me. I did not move. My phone buzzed. "They've taken Caleb into custody as well," Detective Moreno said. "Search warrants are being executed at his office in Columbus." I imagined Caleb in his tailored suits, the careful handshake, the polished smile. I wondered if he had expected it to come this fast. By noon, local news outlets had picked up the story. Franklin County charges, federal investigation, allegations of nearly $2 million in diverted funds. My family name scrolling across the bottom of a screen. I sat at my kitchen table in Columbus, watching the coverage without sound. The headline read, Financial advisor and mother charged in elder exploitation case. Financial advisor. That was Caleb. Within hours, FINRA issued a suspension notice. His registration status changed from active to barred pending investigation. Clients began pulling accounts. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that several had already filed civil complaints. The professional collapse was swift. What hurt more than I expected was hearing about Evan. He was 9. He liked baseball and refused to eat crusts. He once asked me if lawyers were like superheroes. By the end of the week, Caleb's wife had transferred him to another school. Parents talk, children listen. I drove past Caleb's house once and saw the moving truck. I felt something twist in my chest. Not regret, grief for collateral damage. Responsibility sat where it belonged. A few days later, I attended the initial hearing in federal court in Columbus. Marianne and Caleb sat at separate tables, each with their own attorney. Marianne's lawyer was Nathan Cole, a probate and defense attorney known for aggressive courtroom presence. She did not look at me. When the charges were read, the language was clinical: exploitation of an elderly individual, fraudulent use of power of attorney, wire fraud across state lines. The judge set bond conditions, travel restrictions, asset freezes. Cedar Ridge Holdings LLC accounts were immediately restricted. My mother's personal accounts were subject to review pending forfeiture proceedings. The next stage was probate. Franklin County Probate Court scheduled a hearing to address the validity of my grandfather's will in 2021. If Marianne could establish that Harold lacked capacity, she could challenge my status as sole beneficiary. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Judge Eleanor Pratt presided from a raised bench, composed and exact. Victor Langley sat beside me. Nathan Cole represented my mother. Cole stood first. "Your Honor," he began, "we intend to demonstrate that Harold Whitfield was suffering from cognitive decline in 2021. The will executed during that period does not reflect his true intent." I felt my jaw tighten. Victor rose calmly. "Your Honor, we have a notarized affidavit executed contemporaneously with the will, as well as sworn statements from 3 physicians confirming Mr. Whitfield's mental capacity in 2021 and 2022. Judge Pratt adjusted her glasses. "Proceed." Nathan Cole called a neighbor who testified that Harold sometimes repeated stories, that he once forgot a name. Victor responded by presenting medical evaluations, neurological assessments, routine exams, clear documentation stating he was oriented to time, place, and person. Then Victor submitted the affidavit, my grandfather's words, typed and signed. He stated explicitly that he feared financial manipulation and that he was choosing to protect his remaining assets through revised estate planning. Nathan Cole objected. "Your Honor, the existence of an affidavit does not negate undue influence." Judge Pratt leaned forward. "Do you have medical evidence contradicting the physician's statements?" Nathan hesitated. "Not at this time." Silence settled over the courtroom. Judge Pratt spoke clearly. "The court finds that the 2021 will was executed with proper formalities and that Harold Whitfield possessed testamentary capacity. The petition to invalidate the will is denied." It was not dramatic, no gavel slam, just a sentence that shifted everything. In that moment, I was legally recognized as the sole beneficiary and personal representative of the estate. After the hearing, Victor placed a hand on my shoulder. "He prepared for this," he said softly. Outside the courthouse, reporters lingered, cameras angled toward Marianne and Caleb as they exited under escort. One shouted a question. "Did you steal from your father-in-law?" Marianne's face hardened. "I loved him. This is a misunderstanding." Caleb kept his head down. Back at the farm in Lancaster, notices were taped to doors. Asset freeze documentation, pending forfeiture review. The house felt different now, not haunted, suspended. I walked into my grandfather's study and stood by the window. The fields were turning gold, harvest season approaching. For years, he had watched money disappear in increments small enough to hide inside routine. He had documented, signed affidavits, sought medical confirmation, preserved records. He had not shouted, he had prepared. Now the machinery of the legal system was moving in full view. I did not feel victorious. I felt tired and sad. Sad that it took federal charges and public humiliation to surface the truth. Sad that Evan would grow up with headlines attached to his last name. Sad that my mother chose control over honesty. But beneath the sadness was something steadier. The estate was under my authority now. The accounts were frozen. Cedar Ridge was immobilized. The court had validated what my grandfather insisted was real. Consequences were no longer theoretical. They were unfolding in courtrooms and bank offices and newsrooms across Franklin County. And for the first time since I found the passbook, I allowed myself to breathe without bracing for the next denial. Chapter 5. The Final Move. Breathing did not mean it was over. It meant I was finally steady enough to watch it end. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for March 2025 in federal court in Columbus. By then, the headlines had faded into smaller columns, replaced by newer scandals and louder disasters. But for me, time had not softened anything. It had clarified it. The courtroom felt colder than it had during the earlier hearings. Marianne sat at the defense table in a gray suit that made her look smaller than I remembered. Caleb sat at a separate table, his shoulders slightly hunched, the polish worn thin. I sat behind Victor Langley. I did not avoid looking at them, but I did not search their faces for apology either. The prosecutor outlined the numbers with precision. Approximately $1,870,000 diverted over 6 years. $720,000 moved through Cedar Ridge Holdings, LLC. A deliberate attempt to access a restricted account in 2018 using a flawed power of attorney. A pattern of concealment. When it was Marianne's turn to speak, she stood slowly. "I never intended to harm him," she said. "I was trying to keep our family afloat after my husband died. I made decisions under pressure." Her voice trembled at the edges. For a moment, I almost recognized the mother who used to pack my lunches. Almost. The judge listened without expression. "Intent does not erase conduct," he said. "The exploitation of a vulnerable elderly person is a serious offense, particularly when committed by someone in a position of trust." He sentenced her to 7 years in federal prison, no early release eligibility beyond standard federal guidelines, restitution ordered, assets subject to forfeiture. 7 years. Caleb spoke next. "I trusted my mother," he said. "I did not realize the full scope." The judge's tone did not change. "You are a licensed financial professional. You are expected to understand the scope. 3 years in federal prison, restitution, permanent prohibition from acting as a registered representative in financial services." The sound of the gavel was not loud, but it was final. I did not cry. I did not feel triumph. I felt something quieter, a closing. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked questions. I did not stop. Victor walked beside me. "It is done," he said. "Not entirely," I replied. There was still the estate. Over the next several months, assets were liquidated, accounts reconciled. The hidden savings account at Mid-State Federal Bank, which had grown to $2,384,750 by the time it was formally transferred to the estate, was combined with recovered funds and proceeds from forfeiture actions. After legal fees, taxes, and restitution adjustments, the estate totaled just under $2.9 million, under my management. The number felt different now, not abstract, not shocking. It felt like responsibility. I drove to Lancaster one afternoon in late spring, when the fields were finally green again. The farm stood where it always had, steady against the wind. For months, real estate agents had left messages. Developers had called. Land in that area was valuable. Selling would have been simple. I walked through the house slowly. The kitchen still held the faint smell of wood and old coffee. The living room carpet was worn in the places where my grandfather's chair had sat. I stepped into his study last. The desk was clean.
The chessboard still rested on the side table where I had left it. The hollowed chess book sat on the shelf, empty but intact. I sat down in his chair and opened the drawer where Victor had told me my grandfather kept personal letters. There, beneath neatly stacked envelopes, was one addressed in his handwriting. Ilara. I unfolded it carefully. He wrote that truth does not rush, that lies depend on speed and distraction, that patience, when paired with documentation, becomes a form of defense. He admitted he had known for years that money was disappearing. He wrote that confronting Marianne directly would only drive the behavior further underground. So he chose to document, to update his will, to secure medical evaluations, to create a record that could withstand scrutiny. He apologized for placing the burden on me. He said he believed I was strong enough to carry it without becoming bitter. I sat there for a long time after finishing the letter. The farm was not just property, it was context. It was where he taught me to think 3 moves ahead, where he explained that sometimes you sacrifice a piece to protect the board. I made my decision that afternoon. I would not sell. Instead, I allocated a portion of the estate to renovate the house carefully. Nothing extravagant, just restoration, structural repairs, fresh paint, updated utilities. The study remained untouched, except for reinforcing the floorboards and replacing the worn chair with one that would not collapse under time. Once a month, I began hosting a small clinic in the farmhouse living room, free consultations for seniors and their families about financial planning, power of attorney safeguards, and recognizing signs of exploitation. I used my legal background. I partnered with local attorneys and a retired social worker. We kept it simple: coffee, folding chairs, straight answers. The first session had 5 people. The second had 12. One woman in her 70s approached me afterwards and said her son had recently insisted on managing her accounts. She was not sure if she should be worried. I told her, ask questions and make sure someone outside your household reviews anything you sign. I thought of my grandfather. Cedar Ridge Holdings LLC was dissolved under court order. The farm remained in the Whitfield name, but now under my direction. Evan wrote me a short letter from his new school months later. He said he missed his old friends, but liked his new teacher. He did not mention his father. I kept the letter. On a quiet evening in early summer, I set up the chessboard again in the study. White pieces toward the window, black pieces toward the door. I picked up a white pawn and placed it forward 1 square. You were always ahead, I said softly to the empty room. I just followed through. I understood now that revenge was not the point. Exposure was. Protection was. Restoring balance was. If you are listening to this and you have aging parents or grandparents, ask them questions. Review the documents. Do not assume love guarantees transparency. Silence is comfortable until it becomes costly. If this story made you pause and think about someone in your own life, stay with us. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. The truth does not rush, but it does require witnesses. And sometimes, it requires someone willing to make the final move.